Good evening. Thanks for joining us. There's breaking news tonight. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein under nearly constant fire from the White House and now Capitol Hill, where House members are reportedly preparing articles of impeachment against him, fires back, saying about those articles of impeachment, we will not be extorted. He also weighed in on whether or not a sitting president can be indicted, why the president might be indicted, and it's a big might, of course, as that gets us to our Keeping Him Honest report tonight and a question of collusion. Multiple questions, in fact, as we learned from last night's leak obtained by the New York Times. Dozens of questions the special counsel Robert Mueller wants to ask the president. The president's first reaction on Twitter was this: it would seem very hard to obstruct justice for a crime that never happened, witch hunt. For the record, that's not true. Legal experts point out that obstruction of justice is a crime in and of itself. You can be charged with it even if no one else is charged with another crime. We'll get deeper into the legal issues with Professor Alan Dershowitz and Jeffrey Toobin in a moment, but there was also another presidential tweet that followed that deserves some attention as well. The president tweeted, quote, "So disgraceful that the questions concerning the Russian witch hunt were leaked to the media. No questions on collusion. Oh, I see. You have a made-up, phony crime, collusion that never existed, and an investigation begun with illegally leaked classified information. Nice." So there's a lot to unpack there. We have to get this out of the way. As long as he continues to say no collusion, we're going to continue to say the investigation isn't over. We don't know if the special counsel has found anything or will find collusion or coordination or obstruction for that matter. But this tweet is a new spin on the president's oft-repeated refrain, and the new twist is also a new misstatement of fact. No questions on collusion. Now, for the record, there are questions on collusion, multiple questions, in fact. Here are some of the questions the New York Times published that deal with collusion. When did you become aware of the Trump Tower meeting? What involvement did you have in the communication strategy, including the release of Donald Trump Jr.'s emails? During a 2013 trip to Russia, what communication and relationships did you have with the Agalarovs and Russian government officials? What discussions did you have during the campaign regarding Russian sanctions? During the campaign, what did you know about Russian hacking, use of social media, or other acts aimed at the campaign? What knowledge did you have of any outreach by your campaign, including by Paul Manafort, to Russia about potential assistance to the campaign? What did you know about communication between Roger Stone, his associates, Julian Assange, or WikiLeaks? What did you know during the transition about an attempt to establish back-channel communication to Russia and Jared Kushner's efforts? Now, that's not even all the questions that deal potentially with whether there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. There are more. To say there are no questions about collusion is false, to the point of being laughably false. Now, of course, the president banks on the notion that if he says something, if he repeats something, people will believe it. And there do seem to be people who trust the president's misstatements of fact more than their own eyes, more than reality itself. As for the White House, at the press briefing today, Sarah Sanders was asked about this and the obstruction question multiple times.
Is the White House concerned, as Congressman Adam Schiff has said, that so many of the questions point to obstruction of justice?
We here at the White House tried never to be concerned with anything dealing with Adam Schiff.
The president has tweeted about it. He's talked about how none of these questions relate to collusion, but that's not true. Over a dozen of them do. We've talked about accuracy from the president in the past. Why is he mischaracterizing these reports?
Once again, I'm not going to get into the back and forth on matters involving the special counsel, and I would refer you.
Involving the special counsel, that's the president.
It certainly has implications with the special counsel, and I'm not going to get into a back and forth on it. I refer you to the president's personal attorney.
Back to the president's tweet this morning, he said there is no question on collusion, but when you look at these specific questions about outreach by the campaign to Russia, aren't these questions about collusion?
Once again, I'm not going to get into a back and forth about questions leaked or anything having to do with the special counsel, and I would refer you to the president's attorney.
So with the exception of the swipe at Congressman Schiff, a pretty standard repeat performance. The questions are asked, Sanders refuses to answer them, punts the president's personal attorney, says she doesn't want to get back and forth. Not exactly Truman-esque. The White House passes the buck, while the president insists the buck doesn't even exist. Keeping him honest, the buck may not stop there, but neither will the questions. Joining me now, Chief White House Correspondent Jim Acosta. So, Jim, the president certainly didn't wait long to weigh in on these possible Mueller questions.
That's right, Anderson. It's interesting to note that while the president tweeted about these things this morning, he did not answer the question. I was in the Oval Office with him earlier today, asked him if he wanted to comment on the leaking of these questions. He was given multiple opportunities to do so. He declined to do so. So it appears that the White House and the president prefer to have these comments put out in a tweet in writing, so they essentially can't be questioned. And when he is asked in person, he doesn't want to talk about it. So I think that's an interesting distinction to make there. But getting back to the tweets, just to show the one that you talked about earlier when the president said no questions on collusion, that's obviously not the case. You mentioned several there as you went down the list, Anderson. These are obviously questions that have to deal with collusion. And when the White House was asked about this earlier today, they simply didn't want to talk about it. I will tell you, though, there is a real and practical implication in all of this, and that is whether or not it affects, whether the president will sit down ultimately with the special counsel, Robert Mueller. I was told by a source close to all of these discussions, a White House official last night, who said that it could possibly complicate the potential for sitting down with Robert Mueller. They are not happy that these questions were leaked out, but at the same time, they do give you a very big insight into what the Mueller investigation is going for. They are looking at questions of collusion, whether the White House or the president wants to admit it.
And I mean, Jim, this is yet another example from the president of denying things that in reality are in fact true, demonstrably true.
That's right, Anderson. I mean, just because the president says it or tweets it doesn't necessarily make it true. There's obviously this tweet this morning where he said there were no questions on collusion. But Anderson, you go back to the president's multiple misstatements about Barack Obama's birth, whether you go back to his tweets about Barack Obama wiretapping at Trump Tower, or even his repeated statements and tweets that millions of people voted illegally in the 2016 election. Remember, he just said this a couple of weeks ago, repeated it again a couple of weeks ago, and said this wasn't a conspiracy theory. It is a conspiracy theory, and the president continues to misstate facts and twists the truth and lies in many cases. And it is a window into where he is thinking right now in terms of this Russia investigation. The thinking is, I think, inside the president's inner circle and perhaps with the president himself, if he can continue to warp reality, the public's sense of reality when it comes to this Russia investigation, he can convince enough people that this is not an issue. But as you said, Anderson, we have to keep reminding our viewers the Mueller investigation continues. There's a Senate Intelligence Committee investigation that continues, and those investigations have not come to a conclusion on this issue of collusion.
Jim Acosta, thanks very much. Now to new reporting about a move by a group of House Republicans who, according to the Washington Post, have drafted articles of impeachment against Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, a move being described as a last resort. Today, Rosenstein responded to that report. CNN's Manu Raju has more about that. So Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein had some pretty strong words to House members talking about impeaching him today, right?
Yeah, no question. Rod Rosenstein has come under enormous pressure from House Republicans, including from powerful chairmen with subpoena power to turn over thousands of documents as the House GOP targets how the FBI handled the Clinton email investigation and the Russia probe. Now, Rosenstein has relented on a number of those demands from House Republicans who have been backed by Speaker Paul Ryan. They've turned over documents, given the Republicans access, but there are thousands of other documents that the GOP wants to see. And we have learned, Anderson, that in a private meeting last month, Congressman Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan both asked to see an unredacted copy of a memo Rosenstein wrote to Bob Mueller detailing exactly what the special counsel could investigate in the Russia probe. And Rosenstein resisted, telling the Republicans no. Now, Republicans have been complaining for months the document production overall has been much too slow. And now Meadows and other conservatives have discussed the possibility of impeaching Rosenstein if he doesn't comply, even putting together a draft articles of impeachment. Now, when Rosenstein was asked about this by our colleague Laura Jarrett, he pushed back.
Now, there have been people who have been making threats privately and publicly against me for quite some time. And I think they should understand by now the Department of Justice is not going to be extorted.
Now, Meadows later responded that Rosenstein should step down if he feels like he's being extorted for simply doing his job. And that's exactly what Democrats say the Republicans are up to by these tactics. They believe